So in this video, I'm going to be reading some Bell. Miss Bell Hooks, of course. Miss Bell Hooks. We're gonna be reading Miss Bell Hooks. And let's just go ahead and get started. Which chapter should we read, guys? Should we read number 2? Should we read number 1? Should we read number 3? So this is a literary place. This is a literary class. So Bell says, the text says, everyone wants to know more about love. We want to know what it means to love, what we can do in our everyday lives to love and be loved. We want to know how to seduce those among us who remain wedded to lovelessness and open the door to their hearts to let love enter. Lovelessness is a concept which Bell Hooks, I think, founded, actually. And I think this book was published in 1999. But I think she began writing it in 1987 or 1989. And she begins the book with speaking about her previous partnership with a man who I think she dated him for 6 years or something like that. And she begins talking about how it is particularly love setting itself apart from her experiences, let's say divinely, as opposed to love engulfing them or engulfing her throughout her life. Did she become interested in the concept of love? She then notes that in her scholarly work, being a professor at Yale University, and teaching in the field of sociology or psychology, I believe sociology. But I think the book is labeled under psychology, the genre. She talks about how the lack of love in her life inspired her to write about love. And then, as I was saying, she notes how, secondly, the concept of mortality and morbidity come about as proponents and barometers to love, or barometers or parameters to love, wherein which the absence of love experienced through what would otherwise be suicide or the will to die, homicide, or morbidity completely, the lack of will to continue living, were the parameters which bracketed love as a concept in contrast or in continuum otherwise that produce the literary and professionalism to the novel, to the book. She then says that lovelessness as a tokenized term is the culture of love being absent from our society. She explains love then throughout the book, as I've read it before, 2 to 3, 4 to 5 times now, that the pertaining of love and the attaining of love in various social systems or social interactions, social love, community love being that with our community members, social love being that in a general sense towards our society members, so the people at your local stores and gas stations and movie theaters, just the common person. She explains how love can be cultured in all of those areas. She also notes that the concept of lovelessness is the absence of that, which she most generally described love as it is able to impede all of those social systems, as to be contrary, as spoken about with the term lovelessness. The absence of it is empathy. The best word to describe love in this culture is empathy. And lovelessness being the lack of empathy. So the lack of care for children's rights, the lack of care for your neighbor's well-doing or well-being, the lack of care for the social position of correction or accountability, towards our fellow researchers, professionals, and other members of society. She describes various articulations of contrasting and affirmative positions of love, which are best described as empathy. Next, she says that without this, it's a culture of lovelessness, a lack of empathy, and a lack of concern for the well-being of others entirely. She diminishes this into various different categories as explanations as to why this lovelessness might be pervasive in our culture. She takes an approach towards the capitalist schema, in which the rushed lifestyle towards the top tends to make us absent of love and care for those who are beneath us, creating once again a culture and a lack of empathy. She continues to say, the strength of our desire does not change the power of our cultural uncertainty. Everywhere we learn that love is important, yet we are bombarded by its failure. So the media is eroded with examples of love not working out and the culture of love seeming otherwise unattainable, which bell hooks also makes a positional stance against, stating that it is not an abyss or a strange topic whatsoever, but rather it's quite attainable. Solely one needs to recognize what it is, and she tries to establish 10 parameters, or at least 10 parameters, I think, about what it is per chapter as articulated here, for how the definition of love can come about, and then making it, so to speak, seem more attainable due to categorizing it as something physical and describable, as opposed to leaving it to the abyss or to the unknown entity as elusive and unstratified. Having something in a form of containment, a metaphysical work, makes it seem as though a physical object, wherein which the attainability, the description, the comparison, the measurability of it becomes possible. It makes the object, love in this category, objectified now, and thus attainable and more commonplace, as it is able to be placed as something that can have boundaries around it to consider it a physical position against other things, or at least existing in space, amidst space defined otherwise, which is beautiful. The strength of our desire does not change the power of our cultural uncertainty. Everywhere we learn that love is important, yet we are bombarded by its failure. In the realm of the political, among the religious in our families, and in our romantic lives, we see little indication that love informs decisions, strengthens our understandings of community, or keeps us together. This bleak picture in no way alters the nature of our longing. We still hope that love will prevail. We still believe in love's promise. Love is still something that people try to ascertain, even though the media is filled and polluted and diluted with examples of its antithesis. Now, there have been some political and cultural and social scholars who have talked about the capitalist regime in the opposition to love as being something to be as a waste of time, or something to drink oneself out of, or something that is eroded by cheap, misogynistic women, and otherwise it's not an important entity, completely dismissing it, as she talks about in a section on media. But that description of love not failing, or the not passivity, when you're intensively negative about something, the word for this is not pacifist, Yeah, these kids need to stop smoking weed. There's a word for it. Not paramount, not pugnacious, not parameter. Um, there's a word to describe something that is just negatively an entity about another thing. Um, but that when that approach is taken toward not perennial, when that approach is taken towards love, it is such that it is seemingly immediately denied or treated as problematic or schematic to the idea of solely being an idea and not something as real as the pair of shoes or the suit that one buys, which is a problem. The strength of our desire does not change the power of our cultural uncertainty. Everywhere we learn that love is important, yet we are bombarded by its failure in forms of jokes, critiques, comic. In the realm of the political, among the religious, in our families and in our romantic lives, we see little indication that love informs decisions, strengthens our understanding of community, or keeps us together. It's not treated as a physicality, as a transformative object, such as a pay stub is, as informing one's capacity to perform at a higher level at work to increase pay. Love is otherwise treated as elusive or is disregarded. We see little indication that love informs decisions, strengthens our understanding of community, or keeps us together. This bleak picture in no way alters the nature of our longing, as people still desire it. We still hope that love will prevail. We still believe in love's promise. Just as the graffiti proclaimed, our hope lies in the reality that so many of us continue to believe in love's power. We believe it is important to know love. We believe it is important to search for love's truth in an overwhelming number of private conversations and public dialogues. I have given and heard testimony about the mounting lovelessness in our culture and the fear it strikes in everyone's hearts. Bell talks later on about, once again, the capitalist relationship to love and the capacity that love being dismissed as something refutable and problematic toward the timeliness of production in the capitalist scheme is a commonality that other scholars have spoken about as well, where in which the practice of love softens one to another or others, and the empathy produces time and grade to spend with the individuals that the person then loves. With that being, less attention is given paramountly to the system of capitalistic production, which some may say slows capitalistic production. I think some scholars from the 90s were talking about this, or at least in the 90s were talking about this, where if one isn't overproducing at all times, then he is not producing enough. Whereas in love, it is such that it creates the will to relax and to spend more time with the other individual. And love is also healing, as neuropsychologists have studied, and the study of the inner child in inner healing and spiritual analysis of the body and mind, and empathy, in I think soft girl culture, in gentle parenting, and there's another modern concept of I think it's like gentle living. It's very similar to the inner child. It might be the inner child itself, where an efficacy towards the spiritual healing and the emotional healing inside and the way we process emotions comes about and does indeed take time, as is natural, and intentionally slows down the capitalistic production. Whereas prior, love was used as a system of blame for why one doesn't produce as much. notable jokes contain things such as he doesn't work as hard because he's a quote unquote softie, or he's always in love, or he's falling for a woman, as men are used as a key example in the capitalistic production entity here, in critiquing their relationship to love as means and explanations for how much they have produced and thus how much capitalism they can reflect. So, the men in my life have always been the folks who are wary of using the word quote unquote love lightly. They are wary because they believe women make too much of love. And they know that what we think love means is not always what they believe it means. Our confusion about what we mean when we use the word love is the source of our difficulty in loving. If our society had a commonly held understanding of the meaning of love, the act of loving would not be so mystifying. Pessimistic was the word we were looking at, that I was looking for earlier. Pessimistic. People tend to be pessimistic towards the concept of love because of the way that it's been displayed. Now, in contrast, some works that I have found prolifically honor love are Korean drama shows that are regarding love, where a healthy example of love is articulated and appreciated as a normalcy, even so much as a celebration. Atypical, the character Elsa, the mother character in the show, I find her to articulate love continuously in her character, against the positions of her labor as raising her family. It's constant and consistent that her communication of love and the will to love her children better, Casey, Sam, her husband, her partner, her community members, much of her character surrounds her ability and will to communicate love and to produce love at a higher level, which, as Bell notes in this work, many people do. Bell also notes that the framework that we have in the American context is such within the capitalistic scheme, wherein which the will to communicate love is often displayed as capitalistic means, such as buying cards to communicate love, or buying a car to communicate love, or buying flowers to communicate love, or buying chocolates to communicate love, or seeing a movie to communicate love, or buying a new portion of a house to communicate love. Where this transactional nature, and as capitalistic scholars have studied, or anti-capitalist capitalist studies have scholared, capitalist scholars have studied, show that the transactional and consumerist nature sometimes misses the point of the empathy and emotional portions of love, where the transaction then becomes a weighted value for how much love has been communicated. Thank you for watching. To finish up, there is I'll put a link to this in the bio, absolutely, as will I quote Genesis and 1 Corinthians 2 and 12 as communications of love, where God describes love. The Bible, the love is described in the Bible in multiple forms. Thank you for watching.